Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is across the pond, as they say, or as we say here in Canada anyways, over in Ireland. And she's a doctor, Dr. Melissa Kelly. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello from Ireland. And we will get into my journey over here, definitely, because from my accent, you can tell that I do not have an Irish accent.
Yes, and you know what? That's so funny because I was watching some of your posts this morning before we got started. Of course, it's late afternoon for you, and that's the first thing that stood out. I was like, because when you scroll through and like I've been obviously watching you before we connected, and then this was the first time that I turned the sound on. I'm like, what? No accent, So it's kind of funny. Yeah, which will be part of your story, like you say. And also very, very cool that we caught you at this time because you are celebrating, or you celebrated yesterday at time of recording, your 3-year sober birthday. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. I can't believe it's been 3 years. Somebody was asking me recently, like, they're at the very beginning of their sobriety journey. I think they're like 3 or 4 months in, and they were like, do you just feel amazing all the time? Like, you're 3 years sober, life must be so great. And I was like, it kind of just feels normal.
Yeah, right.
It's weird. Like, I did celebrate myself, but it was just a nice normal day. And I'm glad that that's the new normal.
Totally. Yeah, that's a good reflection, actually. And I'm sure, what was that person's reaction when you said that to them? Like, is that kind of like, were they shocked? Or because, yeah, I could see where 3 months in, they'd be like, wait, really? That's normal? Like,
Yeah. I guess they felt a bit reassured that it's
yeah,
not going to feel like that. Like, early sobriety, I always say it isn't how it feels for the rest of your journey. It's like whenever you have, like, you first break up with somebody, that's not what a single life feels like, because you're still
totally.
kind of in that recovery period. But yeah, I think they just felt reassured that there is a point where it just feels like it's the new normal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, as we mentioned before we started the podcast, this is going to come out a little bit later. So worth mentioning, by the time it comes out, so May 2nd is your sober birthday, correct?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
annoys me so much that it's not May 1st, and I think that's what tipped me over the edge. I
That
was
was like
trying to
that.
take a
Like, that's
month
it.
off.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so funny. That's too funny. Awesome. Well, you have a lot going on right now. And the doctor in front of your name, that's amazing. Congrats on putting the work in for that. That's you ended up deciding through your own journey, from what I'm gathering, to steer yourself into doing some sobriety coaching as well. You have your own podcast. You have like a meetup for sober women, I believe, that you facilitate as well. So amazing that you're giving back to the community and so forth. But you can verbalize it far better than I can. I just want to start with that. Just like, what is everything that you have going on, and just kind of like present times. Let's get a little snapshot of what Melissa is doing right now.
Yeah, so I am a coach for high achievers who want to change their drinking habits. And I do a lot of one-on-one work. So I have a one-on-one coaching program, primarily women, is who I work with. A lot of high achievers, a lot of perfectionism that we work through, relying on alcohol to be that reward at the end of the day and the external validation, because that's really what my story was. I am Dr. Melissa Kelly, but I'm kind of like Ross from Friends. Like, I'm not a medical doctor.
Yeah.
I've got my Ph.D. in consumer psychology. So I've been studying psychology for like 10 years, always wanted to be a researcher. And I'll just tell you a bit about how I ended up in Ireland, just so that it's not too confusing. But both of my parents are Irish. They met in the US, where I was born, where my brothers were born. We lived in Philadelphia. And then whenever I was 8 years old, my parents decided to move over to Ireland again. It was right after 9/11, pretty shaken up, wanted to go be with the family. And we lived in Ireland for about 5, 6 years before the recession hit, and we moved back to the US. So there's all these like landmarks as to like why we moved, but we moved back to the same exact town
Oh, wow.
that we were living in. So I like
Crazy.
re-entered high school, and
Yes.
people were just like, don't we know you? Weren't
Yeah.
you with us in elementary school? I was like, yes, it was me, it's me. But so that kind of lended itself, and that's where my parents live now. They live in the US, and that's where I did high school and my undergrad degree. And then I always wanted to be a researcher. I always loved that side of psychology. I didn't necessarily want to become a therapist. I studied psychology for my undergrad, but I found it very difficult to get a research position at the university that I went to. In order to even get a voluntary position, you needed experience. So I was already behind.
Mm.
And so I didn't get a research job whenever I finished college, which I was really sad about. And I ended up taking a job as a behavioral health therapist for a child with autism, which was
Mm.
rewarding in its own sense, but I didn't want to be working in a school. I loved the child that I was working with, but it didn't pay very well. It wasn't really what I was passionate about, and I didn't find it to be something that fulfilled me. Um, and so during that time, that's kind of where my drinking took a turn, and we can get into that a little bit later. But I basically had a big confrontation with the person that I was living with. I was in a toxic relationship at the time. It was just a very rocky year that year after college. And I decided then that I would take myself to Ireland to do my master's in
Mm.
research methods within the realm of psychological science so that I could finally get my research job. And I was only meant to go for a year, but I ended up loving it over here. And I met a man, of course, the way it always goes.
Mm-hmm.
And my best friend lives here, and the majority of my family lives here, aside from my
Oh.
immediate family. They're all over the place here in Ireland. And so I decided that I wanted to stay, and I ended up staying. I got an amazing position as a researcher for a top university up in Belfast, which is technically Northern Ireland, which is technically the UK.
Mm.
And I got also to do my PhD up there for free, which was very cool. So that's end of 2018. That's when that happened. And I moved to Belfast end of 2019. And that's kind of, I was doing my PhD whenever the pandemic hit. And that's when I quit drinking, which was 3 years ago. It was like 6 weeks
Mm.
into the pandemic. And so
Right.
that's really my story of, you know, whenever I quit drinking, I was finally able to reflect back on my career. And I kind of realized that I had constantly been chasing those degrees, the master degree, the PhD, trying to convince other people to believe something to be true about myself that I didn't believe to be true about myself, which was
Ooh.
that I was smart enough, good enough, professional
Mm.
enough, just looking for someone to tell me and validate me like you're doing a good
Mm.
job, because I wasn't very good at telling myself that I was doing a good job. And so
Mm.
that's really a lot of the work that I do with my one-on-one clients too, is like figuring out how to start speaking to yourself in a way that has more compassion and curiosity instead of judgment and beating yourself up about things, and um, really just learning how to develop and cultivate that relationship with yourself so that you don't need the external validation to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Fantastic. I love all of that. I love how you use your own story as well. I think it's just such a, there's just something about that to be able to like explain it and articulate it in such a way that you've experienced it yourself, and then you're able to then teach it to others, right? It's such a strong thing. So yeah, very cool. And I think there's quite a few people that had that, the pandemic kind of was like the pocket of time, or the pocket of like just, you know, non-socializing. The pause button was hit, and I think a lot of people reflected on their drinking. There's quite a few people that I've talked to that have had their sober dates at some point during the pandemic, especially early on. So it's interesting that you had that 6 weeks in. So, and I really want to get into
Yeah.
that. Before we do, though, I want to give you the floor to take the clock back as far as you care to go. You gave us a little hints at like some of the jumping around, moving that, and so forth. But yeah, if you want to fill in some more of the details that way, connect some of the dots, and just tell us a little bit about just however if you want to do upbringing, or pick it up wherever you want to. And I'd really interested to see where your drinking career was earlier on and where it took you, and yeah, like just fleshing out what caused you to end your drinking in the first place. So the floor is yours.
I just want to say I love that phrase, my drinking career, because that's really what it feels like. I feel
Right?
like I retired.
Yes, retired drinker. Yeah, same here. Yeah,
Yeah,
I hear
that is
that.
complete.
Yes.
Yeah, as I said, I moved around a lot. And so I kind of always had that story that like I didn't belong, that I was different, that I was weird. I was always the new kid. I was always the odd one out. And I think that kind of carried throughout high school and throughout me growing up as a teenager. Whenever I did first start drinking, I was probably towards the end of high school. And it wasn't like I had one beer. I had a lot to drink and got very drunk from the very first time that I
Mm.
drank. And it was very much a way for me to see that that voice in my head was quiet. Like I didn't have that voice being like, you're weird, everyone's making fun of you, you're different. And it felt like I just slipped into a second skin where I was like, oh, this feels really good. I'm able to finally be myself. That's the kind of story that I was telling myself, that I was finally being myself. I could talk to people. I had the courage to speak to people. And it was honestly really fun for the first few years. Like I had a lot of fun. I had some, you know, good times with my friends, and that kind of carried through until college. I'd say what we normally did, me and my friend group, we would look forward to drinking every weekend. It would kind of be what we talked about. We looked forward to it. What are you going to wear? Like it was a very positive experience. And of course, there were times where I took it too far or one of my friends took it too far, but we were all drinking basically the same, binge drinking every weekend during college, and it was very normalized. So I didn't think that I had like a problem or anything like that at the time. And it, as I was saying, like it wasn't until that year after college where things started taking a turn. I had turned 21 and I started like picking up a six pack after class to go home and drink and do my homework. And it was just a novelty to have. I also, towards the end of college, started working as a server and a manager at a bar and restaurant in Philadelphia.
Mm.
And so that played a big part in my drinking career,
Yeah, can
you'll
imagine.
say.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's very normalized. I started whenever I turned 21, I was able to drink at the bar too. People would drink after their shift, and I started towards, I think, my senior year, missing a couple of lectures here and there and having hangovers. Still didn't really think it was that big of a deal. I was still getting really good grades. And I also met someone, sorry, there's a tractor going by.
Yeah, you get
Irish life.
Oh, classic. I love it.
Yeah, you're getting the real immersive experience
Exactly.
probably.
Yeah, that's right. It's tremendous.
um, but I met someone through working at the restaurant, who became a very good friend of mine, who we basically bonded over our ability to and love for drinking a lot. And
Mm.
we bonded over that and decided, whenever I finished college, we would move in together. We'd get a house in the city in Philadelphia. And I don't want to get too much into the details of that friendship because we're no longer friends now. It actually didn't end very well.
Mhm.
But she was essentially, I really, as I said, I really struggled that year after college with my mental health and just kind of feeling lost. Was in a job that I didn't like. I had a health issue as well. And that's when I started, I entered into a relationship that was very unhealthy, and that person that I was with was introduced to me by that friend. And
Mm.
so it was just a very weird situation. So I ended up moving in with her and we were drinking all the time. And then she was gaslighting my mental health and like telling me that I had a problem with drinking because there were a few times where I would come home on a weeknight really drunk and, leave a mess in the kitchen or something. And she
Mm.
would tell me that I had a problem with drinking and then in the same breath say, do you want to go get a drink now? It was just very unhealthy situation. Eventually it got to the point where I confronted her. Unfortunately, I was very drunk whenever I confronted her and told her that I couldn't live there anymore. She had also moved her boyfriend into our home at the time, which I didn't really necessarily mind because I did get on well with him, but he was a wine salesman.
Oh, jeez.
And it's like the
Yeah,
best case scenario. He would always
right.
have all these really lovely wines in
Of
our house.
course.
And so
Of
he would be
course.
like, you can drink these that we've opened to like, give to different restaurants to test them. And this is what's left. You can have it. And so I just started picking up all these really unhealthy habits, like drinking all day on Saturday, drinking all day on Sunday, which is not normally something that I would have done. And yeah, like just having wine after work because it's there and all all of that. So ended up telling her that I couldn't live there anymore, ended the toxic relationship that I was in as well that I don't feel like getting into. But
Totally.
um,
Yeah, yeah.
I ended up moving back home with my parents. So that was the summer after the first year I was out of college. And that's when I decided that I was going to go do my master's in Ireland. And in a way, I was like, this is the geographical cure. This is going to fix
Mm.
me.
Mhm.
And whenever I did have that confrontation with my roommate, I took 2 weeks off of drinking after that because that really
Mm,
scared me.
mhm.
And, like, my parents had to come pick me up. I think I was 22, 23 at the time. My parents had to come into Philadelphia and pick me up because I was just not in a good place, quite scary. But I ended up moving back in with my parents and decided that I was going to go to Ireland to have this fresh start, which I think I did. Like, I definitely drank a lot less whenever I moved over to Ireland. I was doing my master's, so it was like I couldn't drink during the week because I had so much going on.
Yeah.
But I was still over drinking on the weekends and drinking more than I wanted to. And then it became the anxiety the day after drinking just became
Mm,
unbearable. And I kind of lived, so that was 2017. I kind of lived in this cycle for 3 years of telling myself that I was going to take a month off of drinking because from the 2 weeks that I had taken off in that summer, I knew how much better I felt.
mm,
I knew that my anxiety was so much better without it. I felt so much better without drinking. And I couldn't shake that knowing once I had experienced that. And I had stayed in that cycle for 3 years of trying to quit drinking, like every Monday being like, right, this is the month that I'm going to quit, or this is the week that I'm not going to drink, or this weekend I'm definitely not drinking, only to find myself drinking that weekend. And then I was just basically stuck in that cycle for 3 years. And that's kind of what happened with regards to me finally quitting. So I quit for 2 weeks in January of 2020, but I couldn't make it past 2 weeks. That was the longest that I could do.
mm.
And then I quit for 2 weeks in March. And then we know what happened in the middle of March of 2020.
Yeah.
And so I just went back to drinking. And then for the first 6 weeks of the pandemic, I told myself every week that I was going to take a week off, but I found myself drinking again. Every single Friday, I would be drinking wine and I would stay up till like 4 a.m. to FaceTime my friends in America because Ireland is 5
Mm,
hours ahead,
right.
and wake up with a horrible hangover every Saturday in those 6 weeks, and then have anxiety for the entire week. Took me like 4 or 5 days just to get back to baseline.
Mm,
And then the final day that I woke up, it was a Saturday, woke up with a hangover, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I was actually crying because I had gotten sick, and that was kind of something that had started happening more and more. Like, no matter how much I drank, it was just
mm,
physically my body couldn't take it anymore.
mhm.
And I looked at myself in the mirror and I was just like, "What are you doing?" And I had always said that to myself. I was like, "What are you doing to yourself?" Whereas in the past, that voice was kind of a judgmental voice, a
Mhm.
shameful voice, but this time
Yeah.
it was like a voice that was coming from a place of love and care. And it was like,
Mm,
"What are you doing? Like, come on, we got to figure this thing out." It was more compassionate voice.
yeah.
And I didn't know at the time that that was going to be the last time that I was hungover or the last night that I drank. But it was.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Thanks for sharing that story. It's yeah. What I love about it, I'm sure you found it as well, is like when you hear people's stories, there's always like elements that you yourself can relate to. You can hear yourself in another person's story, like parts of it anyways. And then there's other parts that are just like, oh wow. And it helps kind of expand my knowledge of like this addiction and recovery and so forth. So I really enjoy you sharing that with me. So thank you.
I actually haven't shared those particular things on a podcast before, I don't think.
Really?
So,
Wow.
yeah.
Thanks. I'm honored that you would do yeah, just let your guard down, so to speak, and just yeah, show up like that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we went real far back. So,
Yeah,
because my
yeah, yeah.
drinking, it was weird. Like, I'd say the worst my drinking was around that time, 2017.
Yeah, okay.
Like,
Yeah,
the actual amount I was drinking and how I was feeling.
yeah,
Whereas within the last year to 6 months of my drinking, looking at it, it wasn't that bad because I was drinking less frequently. I was
yeah.
drinking less because I
Mm.
knew that I wanted to stop. Like, I was slowly cutting down. And so that's usually just what I talk about. But yeah, going back, yeah.
It's cool, right? It's like, I have that whole origin story and you can kind of see it coming, and yeah, like you have the different phases or different stages of it, right? So yeah, it's an important share. So appreciate it. I want to get into some of the things that you've talked about here, and it's like fairly apparent just for me talking to you and reading your bio and such, like the high achiever thing, the perfectionism, how that shows up. Your podcast has a bit of a nuance to it as far as the recovery story. It's like how you interact with, like how alcohol has interacted with your career and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
If I'm sure if I'm paraphrasing correctly, but so I want to get into like that whole idea of like the achiever. Before that, I'm going to step even further back. When you talked about, as soon as you said you started working at a restaurant, I was like, oh, I know where this is going, right? And then you mention it. It's like it's such a part of the culture, right? And I worked at a grocery store for 20 years, and that was a big part of it too, is like a little bit of rock and roll lifestyle, especially when I started. Like I started when I was 16 years old. It was still the Wild West. It was all about like after you have finish your shift, go out,
Yeah.
smoke a doobie, have a couple beers, you know. So, and I imagine like if the friends that I've had that have worked at restaurants, it's like that times 5. Like it's their drink. Sometimes they're drinking on the job, you know what I mean? Depending on the restaurant. So what was that like as far as how did that change your identity, I guess, is like, you know, working in that the restaurant industry?
Yeah, it really did, I really did form part of my identity working there, now that you mentioned that. I thought I was so cool. I thought the people that I worked with were so cool. It was all these alternative people. It was
Right.
like a bar restaurant. It's closed now, but it was like a family-run restaurant that had been open bar restaurant that had been open for like 30 years. The staff was like family, like these people
Wow.
that I hung out with all of the time. And, it was just so fun to
Yeah,
be able
sure.
to like,
Sure.
I would cycle to work and cycle home drunk all of the time, which looking back, my mom would be like, "Melissa, what are you doing? You can't be doing that. Just get a taxi home," because I would be going through North Philadelphia, which is not the safest place in the world.
Gotcha.
But it really did, like, I just sometimes I do look back on that with such nostalgia and so fondly, because for a very long time and a very large piece of that, it was really fun. It was exciting. It
Mm,
was an adventure.
yeah.
And I could see now looking back that a lot of those people working there definitely have their own struggles with their relationship with alcohol. And somebody that I was working with, actually, two people that I worked with there were the first sober people that I met, because there's a lot of sobriety in that industry as well, because
Yeah.
people
Okay.
go to the other side of the coin.
Sure. Sure.
And so I had never really experienced, or maybe I had in my childhood, but I just wasn't aware of somebody who had quit drinking. And at the time, I was like, that's the silliest thing in the world. Drinking's
Totally.
amazing.
Yeah, right. Why would you quit that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. I like when you the magic word there, nostalgia. And I think like I just crossed my 4 years in April. So I am very
Congrats.
much, thank you. I've you know, I'm starting to let my guard down as far as being able, and I appreciate what you're saying. And you know, some people that are maybe early on in their sobriety are going to hear you reflecting back on something with nostalgia and be like, oh, because like I know for myself, I wouldn't allow myself to be nostalgic about it, because as soon as I did, I would backslide very quickly, because I'm like, actually, yeah, that was pretty cool. Let's do it again, you know. So I'm thinking that like I had my guard up, and now it's like the pendulum has swung where I'm just like totally like sober, not even thinking about, you know, my past experiences as being fun and adventures. And now the pendulum is swinging kind of somewhere in the middle where I can actually look back and realize, hey, with like you mentioned, the compassion, I can look back at myself. I was a shy kid. I used it for a certain reason. And I can look back on it with compassion instead of this like pushing it down and like, don't think about it. And like, you know what I mean? So I like how you're saying, yeah, nostalgia is like, did you find that you were able to have that sense of nostalgia early in your sobriety, or has that come with time with your sobriety and recovery?
Oh no, that's very recent.
Oh, is it okay? Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
it sounds similar then. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I kind of blocked a lot of things out, I think.
yeah.
Even just from making that move to Ireland, just blocking everything out for a while,
Mm,
and then it all just comes back, doesn't it? But
yeah,
in the
definitely.
early days, I had to do I like to say that I've ruined drinking for myself, because I've went there so many times in my mind
Oh,
about, like, rewriting that story around
yeah,
alcohol,
yeah.
where I know that I wouldn't even be able to enjoy it, because
Yes.
I'm so conditioned now to, whenever I think or romanticize drinking, like, even now when I'm sharing that with you about how I am quite nostalgic for those days,
Yeah.
this thought after that is usually something along the lines of, like, Yeah, but we're looking back here with rose tinted glasses. Like there were obviously problems going on then. Like I wasn't in a great relationship and I had no clue what I wanted to do with my career. Like there were so many other things that were going on at the time. And I think what I need to remember is I'm not nostalgic for what happened. I'm nostalgic for how I felt, which was connected to people.
Bingo. Yeah.
And I think that that's a very important thing to differentiate. And that's
Yeah.
something that I work a lot with my clients on is I was speaking with a client the other day and she was talking about how her and her family love going to wineries and that's a big thing for her. And I was asking her like what do you actually enjoy about going to the wineries? Is it the wine or is it how you feel when you're there? Is it feeling connected to the people while you're there? And I
Mm.
think it's really important to point out to yourself the difference.
Yeah, that's yeah, very, very well put. Especially yeah, when we are talking about it in this the context, it's worthwhile to get a little more granular about it as far as what you mentioned. So for me, like for me to look back on it, it was like for me to the ability to have the connection, absolutely, because of always feeling like a bit of an outcast as well myself. And it that gave me the idea that I could be more connected with people for sure. The other one for me as well is just like carefree. And actually, this will be a good segue into my next question. The carefree nature, because generally speaking, I fancied myself as like a high achiever as well. There was a degree of perfectionism. So when I could have that 2 hours of time to just be like carefree and just like, fuck it,
Yeah.
like this is how I'm gonna be. I don't even have to worry about that stuff right now. Part of me is jealous of being able to do that. Having said that, I've now cultivated that with different healthier things, you know what I mean? Like meditation, breath work, things of this nature. So I'm just yeah, kind of curious, was that a little bit of it as well for yourself? Like getting back to the whole idea of like the perfectionism and the achiever, was like alcohol sort of a release mechanism for that as well for yourself?
Oh yeah, definitely. I felt like I was living a double life
Mm,
sometimes because
yeah,
during the week, especially whenever I was doing my PhD and working for that university, it was a very prestigious career that I had. It was an EU funded research project where I was basically getting paid a very good salary to travel, do research, and do my PhD alongside of all of that.
nice.
And with that came a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of
Mm,
stress, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of actually loneliness because I was oftentimes working by myself. I was writing all of the time and I worked in an office where everyone else in my office, they had lab-based work to do, so they were never at their computers, they were in the lab, and
mm,
I had a computer-based project. I was just writing, so I was just there the whole time alone. I had moved to Belfast to do this, and so I only knew like one other person there who was my cousin. And it was just a very lonely time. And so at the weekend, I could kind of turn that off and I could
mm,
just be silly Melissa, like carefree, joke, go crazy, go drink until 3 o'clock in the morning, do something stupid, whatever it was. And obviously, I had to deal with the repercussions of that. But for a very long time, I felt like I was two different people,
yeah,
constantly, like during the week, feeling like I was going to get found out, that I
yeah,
was going to, like, someone was going to see me out one night and I wouldn't remember it. And I
yeah.
just lived in constant fear that somebody
Oof,
had known that about me, that
yeah.
like I was out giving a presentation and I would look out at everyone and be like, my first thought would be, have any of them seen me drunk around the streets of Belfast recently? It was
Right.
horrible. And that was what it was
Wow.
like in my other job too, as a behavioral health therapist, because at the weekends I was going out and getting pretty drunk as well in Philadelphia where I worked. So just constantly living in fear, you know?
Yeah. Yep. I do know. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Not like that exact like, nuance, but absolutely for sure. Yeah. I think a lot of people relate with that. Well, I want to get into like how you're helping some folks now with this like experiential knowledge, like the things that you've been through, also coupled with the scholastic background that you have, and now you're helping specific. I love the like little turn or little twist on the recovery coach thing of like we work with professionals with people that have high expectations of themselves, that have a lot of balls in the air, so to speak, but yet just they can't get their what together
Mhm.
with the drinking. So um when you're reaching out for those types of people, or those people are reaching out to you, yeah, like what is the process with that? I mean, you touched on it earlier. You said it's like I gather it's a lot of like inner dialogue work, like how you're speaking to yourself. Just so, yeah, a little bit of elaboration on like what you specifically work with people on.
Yeah, so the person that comes to me is typically somebody who has it all going on and has that belief of like, if I'm so smart, why can't I quit drinking? It's like the
Right.
one thing that they just can't figure out, which is very similar to my own story. And my background is in psychology, so I use a lot of the concepts based in cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm, mhm.
So, understanding how your emotions are caused by the way that you're thinking, whether that's subconscious thought patterns that you've carried out throughout your life, or intentional thought processes that you can create to create
Mm,
new ways of feeling about different situations. And the work that I usually do is around dismantling their desire to drink,
mm,
which is coming from those stories that they have about alcohol. And a lot of the times, what people will do whenever they're trying to quit drinking is they'll only focus on changing the behavior. They'll just try to stop
yeah.
drinking. But
Mhm,
behavior change is so much more complex than just
mm,
changing your behavior
yeah.
because our behavior as humans is motivated by how we're feeling, right? That
Right.
behavior of drinking is motivated by our desire to drink on some level, whether it's conscious or subconscious.
Mm,
And that desire is coming from the way that you're thinking. And so,
mhm.
what a lot of people will do is cut out alcohol and keep their desire to drink, which means that they're relying on willpower. They're resisting those urges and those temptations all day long, which willpower is a finite resource. It
Right.
exhausts over time.
Yeah.
And eventually, like that amount of willpower just gets shorter and shorter and shorter until you just give in and drink. And there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of feeling like you're missing out on something, that you're being deprived, because the story you still have is that alcohol is something that you want, but you're not allowed. And so
Right.
I help my clients get to a place where they don't need to rely on willpower to stop drinking, because you don't need willpower to stop yourself from doing something that you don't want to do
Mm,
ultimately. Like
mhm.
if there were cigarettes all over the place here, I don't need willpower to stop myself from picking up all of those cigarettes and smoking them,
Yeah.
because I've done a lot of, well, not even a lot of work, but I've made decisions that I don't smoke. I'm not someone who smokes. There's an identity thing in there too.
Yeah.
And I know all of the repercussions that can happen if I smoke cigarettes. So I don't pick up cigarettes because I don't have a desire to smoke cigarettes. And so when you're working on dismantling your desire, you're taking a look at your relationship with alcohol, the identity that you have of yourself in relation to alcohol, and all of those stories that you're telling yourself about alcohol that's making you want to drink. So that's really what I take a look at and then start
Yeah.
creating and challenging those beliefs, being like, is that really true? Some stories that people will hang on to is alcohol helps me relax. We
Mm,
can question that and be like, okay, if alcohol really helps you relax, would you feel hungover the next day?
yeah.
Like a massage
Yeah.
helps you relax. Do you get, sick the next day after you
Yeah.
have a massage?
Hopefully not. Yeah.
Hopefully not.
Yeah,
If
so
so, you're missing out.
yeah, big time. Yeah, I love that. That's super cool. I want to get a little bit into like, just like the word identity as well. Like what is identity to you and how would you like describe it? Because like to me, it's like, it's a series of it's based on a series of values, like pillars, if you will, of like characteristics that I champion about myself. You know what I mean? And then like within that, I kind of that's like the framework for my identity. My identity is sort of a mix of, like my intuition, as well as absolutely like the thoughts that I have and how my perception of how I'm connected with my family, my friends, many different things. I'm curious what you look at as your identity and then how you then teach it or, tweak it with other people.
That's a very interesting question. The first thing that comes to mind for me is social identity. I always tell people that I have
Mm.
a social identity crisis because whenever
Oh,
I'm in America,
yeah.
I'm the Irish person, but whenever I'm in Ireland, I'm the American person. It's very
Right.
weird.
Yeah,
And that's
gotcha.
definitely been something that I've grappled with, probably still am grappling with throughout my
Yeah.
life is
Yeah.
who am I? Where am I from?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
question, that
Wow.
social identity piece is the first
Yeah.
thing that comes to mind. But when you were talking about, I think I really agree with what you were saying about identity. It really just is a collection of beliefs you have about yourself, I think,
Mm, mhm.
and a collection of beliefs that you hold about yourself in relation to your world, the way that you perceive yourself in
Yeah.
your life. And I think for a really long time, I didn't think that that could change. I didn't
Mm,
think that identity was malleable, but
mm,
it totally is. And it's not something that you snap your fingers and it happens overnight. It's something that is created or changed over time. And I've changed my identity many times. I was the
yeah.
party girl. I
Yeah.
was the person who was struggling to quit drinking. I was the newly sober person.
Yeah. Right.
Now, and then for a while, like I kind of, whenever I left academia after quitting drinking to start my own business, originally I started a career coaching business, helping
Mm,
other academics transition into non academic careers and deal with confidence and different things like that. Cause that was something that I had really worked through as I was transitioning out of academia. And I really took a step back from the sober community, I think, within that
mm,
year. I think that was around the second year, the first year of sobriety, I was all in. I loved the sober community and I was in every day, looking at it every day. And I think I just needed to take a step back
hmm
from it for a little while to kind of figure out who I was separate from that,
yeah.
if
That
that
makes
makes
sense.
sense. I'm not sure if that's something you've ever experienced.
Yeah. Totally
And
does.
now I've re-entered it and now I'm Melissa, the sobriety coach who's helping other
Yes.
people change their habits. And so I'm still in it, but it's for a different reason, which is very cool. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
I love all that. When you say about like beliefs, like I'm having a I love these like over time, like words that I knew as like you learn in elementary school and I'm finding like the more curious I am, and I'm definitely a lifelong learner, that words I start kind of like reinvestigating them, you know what I mean? So beliefs for me now is it can be a double-edged sword, right? Because if I have a belief about myself that's not really true, that's what we get into what you're talking about, the stories that people tell themselves, right? Or the justifications that we can come up with. And I get the impression that you're there to reflect back to the person. The example I'll use is the one that you just said about, oh, it helps me relax. I'm like, well, does it really? You know what I mean? Like challenging that belief about alcohol. I'm not necessarily about yourself, but I'm sure there's like a belief in there that like I deserve to relax. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm just kind of curious about that, like just the word beliefs. Like, what does that word sort of mean to you these days as well?
I think it's so important to check in with yourself and see what you're believing
Mm,
because that's how we filter information as humans. Our brain's always
ooh,
looking for evidence that what we believe is true. And
yes,
we
yes.
have so much information to process in our brains at any one time, right? So
Yeah.
we literally have to signal to our brain what is important information to process. And we do that through our
Mm,
beliefs that we hold and the thoughts that we have.
smart. Yeah.
And it's like if you were in a crowd of people and everyone was talking and somebody said soda, computer, you wouldn't really pick it up. But if they said Matt, you would hear it because your
Yep.
brain knows that that's important information to have.
Right.
And your brain is always going to try and prove those beliefs that you have to be true because your brain wants to solve the problem, it wants to be correct.
Mm,
And so whenever you're holding on to that belief, let's just say of like I can't relax without alcohol, you're speaking that belief into existence because your brain's going to find all the reasons as to
yeah.
why you can't
Yeah.
relax without alcohol. It's going to be like, well, every time I try to sit down, someone's calling me, or I can't stop thinking about work every time that I sit down that I want to relax, whatever stories, right? So your brain's like, yep, that's true, that's true, that's true.
Mm,
And that's why it's so important to create those new beliefs or transition into those new beliefs. A trick that I have that I use with my one-on-one coaching clients is a ladder belief or a ladder thought. So
mm,
if you're trying to go from I can't relax without alcohol to I don't need alcohol to relax, for some
yeah.
people that might be a very big jump
hmm
because your brain's going to call BS and be like,
Sure.
no, this isn't true.
hmm
So something that you can start saying is I'm working on believing that I don't need alcohol to
Gotcha.
relax. And that
Gotcha.
way you're priming your brain to be
Yeah.
like, okay, we are working on this. This is something that we're doing.
Super cool.
So it's a way, and then it'll start finding evidence of that. It's like, oh, I was journaling and I figured this thing out, or I tried to
Mhm.
do a meditation and that went this way. And so maybe I want to try it differently the next time, but we're working on this. So it's so
Yes.
important to pay attention to what you're believing and what you're telling yourself, because ultimately that creates the results that you're getting in your life.
Yeah, 100%. I love that one. I'm going to start using that. Another one that I found very effective is like if you say I can't do something and then put yet on the end, Man,
Yeah.
it changes the energy in my body when I say that. Just the yet, I'm like, gives me that like little bit of hope, a little bit like rebellious, like, yeah, yet I am gonna get to this at one point, you know. So like that idea of, what did you call it? Is it ladder?
Yeah,
What did
like a ladder or a
Okay.
bridge. Yeah.
Okay, like our
Hmm.
like a bridge statement, is that what you would call it?
Hmm.
Okay, very cool. I love that.
Yeah.
Um,
Because like you're climbing your way in between the two.
Instead of doing this long jump, you're like, yeah, climbing or walking your way into something, and then
Yeah.
your brain will be primed, like you mentioned, to be able to believe it.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's like, it's like when you were talking there, you mentioned like the brain. I always think it's like the brain's like a Google search engine, right? So you'll put like whatever belief you have in there, and of course it's going to support that. If that's what you're inputting, and like all these articles will come up to support it. So like, yeah, so yeah, interesting. The confirmation bias aspect of it, I guess, right? Like
Yeah.
we can find anything to be like, well, I'll just Google like this with a specific set of words, and of course it's going to generate. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I was right. You know what I mean? When
Yeah.
meanwhile I saw this like, yeah, nonsense. Yeah, you know, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we got about 10 minutes left here, so I want to give you this opportunity to, if anybody's like wants to reach out to you, if you have anything you want to promote, is there anything coming up for you, you know, by the time, you know, this airs, you know, in the next few months, anything at all that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. Well, I have a one-on-one coaching practice where I usually work with high achieving professionals on changing their drinking habits. That can look like going completely sober, trying to cut down, trying to stop over drinking. I work with a lot of people with a lot of different goals. I really meet you where you're at with your relationship with alcohol and your goals that you're trying to achieve. Don't use labels if that's not your thing. Don't count days if that's not your thing. So if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, you can just go to my website, melissakellyphd.com. You can also find me on Instagram and TikTok. TikTok is where I
TikTok.
do the majority of my
Nice.
social media posting. I found an amazing community over there. So definitely check that out. I post videos pretty much every single day. I also have my podcast, Working Sober, which Matt is going to be a guest on very
Yes,
soon. So
yes, looking
definitely
forward
check
to
that
it.
episode out because that'll be live
Oh,
before
very
this
cool.
episode
Yeah,
comes
right,
out.
it will be. Yeah, curiously enough, yes.
Yeah. So that's a podcast where I speak with different people who have changed their career trajectory off the back of quitting drinking and found a lot of professional success and fulfillment off the back of quitting drinking, because that's really truly related to my story. Quitting drinking was really the catalyst that helped me go from researcher to business owner. Finding the confidence to do that was definitely a byproduct of quitting drinking. And what else am I doing? Oh, I am the founder of Sober Girls Ireland. So if you're a girl living in Ireland, if you're sober or sober curious, definitely check us out. You can follow us on Instagram at Sober Girls Ireland. We also have a private Facebook group, and we host in-person and virtual events in Ireland. We just had our very first one in Dublin last week, which was super fun. We went out to afternoon tea,
Nice.
and I started that in January. So that's fairly new. But I saw that we really needed a sober community here. I was super inspired by Millie Gooch from Sober Girl Society. I don't know if you know her,
Mm,
over in the UK.
no, not sure. I'll look her up
Um,
though.
yeah, she has a book and everything, and she
Oh, cool.
started an amazing community over in the UK, hosting in-person events, virtual events, and that's kind of what I modeled this community after,
Yeah.
and hoping to have more events coming very, very soon. And trying to think what else. I think that's it for now. For
Yeah,
now,
that's
who
right. Yeah.
knows by the time this comes out?
Right. By that time you'll be like a published author, and you know what I mean? All
Oh
this other
God, no.
stuff. Yeah. Okay. Okay. No book in the future. No.
I'm not sure if you can see my thesis sitting back there. That's like
Oh, okay.
350 pages. No, it's like down
Oh,
there.
there we go. I got it. I got it. Yeah.
So I'm just actually dipping my toe back into writing because I was scarred after writing that thing. I
Okay.
have to say.
Yeah, fair enough.
If you ever want to learn about the general public's risk perception of harmful environmental chemicals, definitely
Yeah.
go check it out. Which is really
Yeah.
actually closely pertains to what I'm doing now, like
Interesting.
learning and addressing how behavior is sparked through different attitudes and awarenesses of different
Yeah.
chemicals, harmful chemicals. But I also just started, and you might be interested in this actually.
Mhm.
I started a Substack for my
Mm,
podcast as a
okay.
way to be more interactive as well. So definitely go check
Smart.
that out too.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have all that in the show notes as well, because there's a lot to take in with
It'll
Dr.
be a
Melissa
book
here.
down there.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's be like half the show notes will be all the different things you have going on. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a fantastic conversation, and yeah, I'm looking forward to having the script flipped. Yeah, yeah, I'll be and then I'm on the hot seat next time. So yeah, it was a pleasure
Yeah.
getting to know you. Thanks so much, Dr. Melissa.
Thanks so much, Matt. I really loved chatting with you, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
You bet.